Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing something we haven't done in a while. If y'all were on my channel a few years ago, I don't know if y'all remember something called Haunted History Week, where it was the last week of October. I would try to do a video every single day talking about a location's haunted history. Now, I haven't done that ever. I didn't actually do the first week. My mental health has been shit. I always wanted to keep going with it, but I never actually took the time to do more research. Now, there is one that I had planned to do when I first did it back in 2020. That was when I first started. It's been 4 years. That was going to be about White Rock Lake. Now, I have all of my research since 2020. I've been researching for 4 years. I've gone to White Rock Lake countless times, taken countless videos, pictures. I've even gone inside the bathhouse museum. But as we know, haunted history, I'm always going to talk about the history of a location because that's my bread and butter. That's what I love doing. And then we're gonna go into the tragedies that have led to the stories that people nowadays know. Let's go ahead and get started with the history of White Rock Lake. This lake is very attached to Dallas, to the DFW area, because it is one of the original settlements, if you will. So before the 1840s, originally there were only Native Americans around here. It was a White Rock Valley, actually, and there were bison that roamed free, and they were hunted. They were hunting ground for Native American tribes. It was part of the vast Blackland Prairie. There actually was a Native American burial found. It was mainly Native Americans, and then when we hit 1841 is when, of course, we go into the dark side of American history, where you get a lot of white people that come in and just do their thing, as they love to fucking do. And I'm gonna keep looking down because I got notes, a lot of notes. The first few of the settlements start in 1841. We start with John Neely Bryan. He establishes a trading post on the Trinity River, 6 miles west of the White Rock Creek Valley. White Rock is in the northeast part of Dallas. He's set up on Trinity River, which is a little bit more south. That's closer to downtown Dallas. I'm pretty sure that's actually what you find in downtown, the little shack that they have. So then in 1842, we started to get pioneers beginning to settle down here in the White Rock Valley, especially after that trading post. Now we got people that are starting to pass through and are starting to settle. Native Americans and white settlers, of course, per usual, based on what white people like to do. They start clashing, there's fights, there's blood, all types of gory details. We know. So from 1842 to 1847, the 5 years, their situations. In 1847, though, the men from the White Rock area volunteer for the Mexican War. So they end up leaving, and a lot of matriarchs end up being in charge, so to say. So then we go into 1848. They actually start establishing more concrete, or I guess solid settlements. So now we get an actual cemetery. There's the Cox Cemetery that was established on the west side of the lake. And if you actually drive by White Rock Lake, it is still there today. No one is allowed in. It is locked, key lock. But if you do stop, you can kind of see and read the plaque that talks about the history. And the first burial there was actually the infant daughter of Solomon and Lydia Dixon. Their daughter, Margaret Frances Dixon, sadly passed away and was buried in that cemetery. So then we go to 1879, and we have Anna Hinterman and Jacob Boer. They moved to Dallas County. They established a dairy farm in 1891, and they expand their dairy farm after purchasing a 200-acre site on the west side of White Rock Creek. Something interesting that a lot of people don't know, there was actually an African-American family that lived on the edge of their property. We had Uncle Page and Aunt Liza, who owned about 2 to 3 acres where they had a church and a cottage. From 1891, they're doing great. However, in 1904, the matriarch, Anna Hinterman, she ends up passing away. So the children had moved away, and then they come back to Dallas to continue to attend school after their mother died. However, at this time, the population in Dallas had grown significantly, so now there were a lot more people basically trying to say like, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, and citizens ended up voting to build a lake with a dam at the very edge of the Boer Swiss dairy farm. So these were built at the edge of the Swiss Boer farm. This edge would have been the farm. The farm ended up being condemned and the land was designated for a filtration plant. Through to 1909, there were 3 rural communities that were established around the White Rock area. We had the Fisher, the Reinhardt, and we had Little Egypt. So then we go into 1910, and this is where we actually start to see more of the lake. In 1910, 2,292 acres were purchased to create a new lake 10 miles northeast of Dallas. This purchase cost, and this is to tell you how much inflation has hit us, 2,292 acres, $176,420. Based on Google, if the inflation rate is 3.12, that means that $1 in 1910 is worth $33.19 today. So today, White Rock Lake, those acres, 2,292 acres, would cost about $5,855,379. It's still cheap considering that it's 2,000 some acres. That's very cheap considering the extreme. You all know how much acres cost nowadays. A year later, in 1911, the dam and the spillway were fully completed and the lake was fully completed by 1914. The main reason why this was kept is because it was used as a water source for the city until 1929. So nobody could really use it for recreational purposes. In 1929 is when a larger lake in Louisville, which is now known as Louisville Lake, ended up being constructed and completed. Because it was much larger, it became the go-to water source for Dallas. The ownership for White Rock Lake at that point was transferred from what would be the facilities department over to the parks and recreations department. And then it was actually open to the public. White Rock Lake Park was established in December of 1929. So this was all very fast within 1 year. In 1930, that's when we actually started seeing a lot of recreational activities start to blow up. To break it down, April 1930, a park board member named Hugh January publicly assured citizens that only a boathouse, a beach and a bathhouse, and a golf course were to be built. After a letter had been published in the mail that was concerned that they were going to try to build, like, going to do like a Coney Island style thing down there. August of 1930, those facilities were actually open to the public and were enjoyed by the thousands. Private clubhouses and private camps were also opened around the lake. One example would be the Dreyfus Club, and that mainly only the wealthy could enjoy, but those started propping up along the lakeside. In August 8th of 1935, around the time of the Great Depression, a little after the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps actually established a camp at Winfrey Point. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a federal voluntary work relief program that ran from 1933 until 1942. They mainly helped provide jobs for unemployed, unmarried men during the Great Depression, and it was mainly just to get them to do any jobs. So over the next 7 years, about 3,000 workers for the CCC ended up planting trees and building some of the permanent structures around the lake, such as the Overlook and the picnic pavilion at Flagpole Hill, and the recreation buildings at Winfrey Point, Big Thicket, and Sunset Bay. Many of these are still there today. As I mentioned, there was a lot of rich people around here, okay? A lot of people owned a lot of land around here. One of those people was a geophysicist named Everett L. DeGoyler. In 1939, he actually ended up purchasing a couple of acres on the edge of White Rock Lake and built a Rancho Encinal-inspired home that is still there to this day, and you can actually get tours of. Fast forward to 1941, this is what I meant by we discovered some burial grounds. In 1941, there were some floods that ended up uncovering 2 ancient Native American burial grounds. It was a couple with a baby, and they had a necklace made from polished bone beads. It did provide solid proof that there was a Native American settlement here before the white people got here. In 1942, the city ruled that any private, like the rich people, their private clubhouses and camps had to be removed in order to provide more public access to the park. The Civilian Conservation Corps actually ceases their operations at White Rock Lake after the program ended on June 30th, 1942, due to President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanting all focus on World War II. So once World War II started, they basically just gave up on the Conservation Corps and they focused on that. There was, however, a U.S. Army 5th Ferrying Command operated a temporary boot camp on the edge of the lake from February 25th, 1942 to 1943. Then if we skip forward to November 1944, about 300 German POWs, prisoners of war, were actually imprisoned at that boot camp until the end of World War II. So anybody who was captured from 1944 to 1945, they had the possibility of being prisoners at White Rock Lake. We go forward to 1946. A floating dance hall called the Bonnie Barge began to operate on the lake. So this is a big ferry that was just a big dance hall that would float on the lake at night, and you would just dance on top of it. And it was actually very interesting. I think it was also one of those that had to be rich people mainly, but they did make it accessible for most people, if I'm not mistaken. During 1946, this is after World War II, so everybody from the barracks was gone. SMU, actually, Southern Methodist University, that is in Dallas, ended up using the old POW barracks for 250 students that were veterans. Basically soldiers from the war that were coming back to go back to college ended up being dormed, like that was their living barracks over at the old POW barracks. It was 250 students that were on the GI Bill, so that was their free housing, so to say. In 1947, thankfully, Dallas actually began demolishing and relocating or selling the surplus buildings at the POW site. SMU stopped using them, and Dallas was trying to remove that part of history from the site. In 1951, the last POW building was actually damaged, and they're not entirely sure for why, but they're suspecting it was pranksters with a dynamite blast. It was demolished shortly after that situation. Now, here's the thing. Throughout this whole time, you could swim, you could boat, you could go in the water at White Rock Lake. It was fully recreational. You could be in there at all times if you wanted to. However, in 1953, there was a severe drought in Dallas that led to a swimming ban that is still active to this day. Since 1953, that's been almost 70 years now, no one has been allowed to actually swim in White Rock Lake. You're allowed to take boats. I think you're allowed to jet ski, you're allowed to fish, you're allowed to walk around the trails, but no one is allowed to swim in White Rock Lake. So the lake, after that drought, ended up being used as a water source again. And that ended all of the lake activities, including that dancing barge, the Bonnie Barge. And this is when the haunted stories started being mentioned a little bit. This is when rumors started going around about something that was called the Lady of the Lake. And it was actually a little story, a short story, that was featured in a book called Neiman Marcus, Texas. If I'm not mistaken, it was like a tourist book or like a guidebook. And in 1976, the Parks and Recreation Department ended up purchasing the 43-acre DeGoyler estate. Remember how I told you that at some point someone built a house right next to the lake? They were a geophysicist, so they actually imported and collected some of the most beautiful and just diverse fauna and flora that you can imagine. There's so many plants. And after they passed, the city, the Parks and Department ended up purchasing the 43-acre estate. Then in 1984, the DeGoyler estate ended up being opened as the Dallas Arboretum and Botanical Society, which you can go into to this day for, I think, $12 a person, 15 or something like that. Everything was kind of chill at White Rock until 2006, when the Dreyfus Club, one of those elite clubs, the private clubs that used to exist, the building ended up burning down around that time, and that was the last of the historical buildings that so far has been destroyed. Everything else that is there has been maintained to a certain extent. Now that we've kind of covered the full history of the lake that I could find, at least, let's get into some of the tragedies that have started to happen, or that have happened over the decades. The very first tragedy that we hear about is actually from May of 1927, where a woman named Haley Enid Gaston actually drowned in the lake. So people suspect that this is where the story of the Lady of the Lake was born. The story of the Lady of the Lake is essentially that a couple was driving around White Rock Lake one night, and there ends up being a woman soaking wet, basically standing in the middle of the road in front of them. They stop, and she basically says, "I need a ride home. I fell into the water. Can y'all give me a ride home?" Yeah, she gets into the car. She's dressed in like luxurious clothing, but not modern for the time. They take her to this house, like it's literally a house like near the lake. When they get to the house, She's gone, disappeared from the back seat, and there's just a wet spot on the seat. So they decide, like, let me just go up there and see like what's going on. What the fuck just happened? They end up going up to speak to the man who lives there. They knock on the door. This is like 3 in the morning, by the way. They wake up the man. He comes out and they tell him what just happened, and he says, my daughter drowned in the lake a few months ago. You're the 3rd couple to do this. The Lady of the Lake story was actually first published in the Neiman Marcus guidebook in 1953. After that, like, I couldn't find all deaths. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot. There's been a lot of people that have died at White Rock Lake, but I found like the main ones that have been historically documented from when the lake first opened to now. In January 10 of 1934, there was a small private plane that was stunting or performing stunts over the lake. They ended up crashing into the water, killing all 3 people aboard that private plane. In July of 1935, we get a woman named Louise Ford Davis, admitted by drowning in the lake. 1938, there was a teenager named J.C. Hacker Jr. who drowned in the lake, and they never recovered his body. It was never found. To this day, that body has not been found. Fast forward to summer of 1941, and this is the weird part. A famous swimmer, a man known for swimming, 27-year-old John Ira Howard, died while stunting or performing stunts in the water for his friends on the lake. In November of 1942, we get a woman named Rose Stone who also drowns herself in the lake. Now, I couldn't find too much info on it. I just know it just says that she drowned herself in the lake. I couldn't find much more after that. After that, it kind of became very scarce to find the news. I did find some archives from the city of Dallas. 1935 to 1960 is what I could find. And what I found is July 23rd, 1950, there was an article that was published of Martha Jane Francisco drowning at White Rock Beach. Couldn't click the article, couldn't find more info. All I got was that she drowned in the lake on July 23rd, 1950. After that, I did find 2 more instances of deaths in 1950, but I can't find the exact months. I just know that they're either after or before Martha died, but they're in 1950, and that would be William A. King, a man, drowned at White Rock Beach after having a heart attack while he was in the water. The 3rd death that I have is Frank De Rosa. He was a U.S. military man who drowned in an accident. Don't know what the accident was. Couldn't get more info. I would have to go downtown and get permission from the city of Dallas to pull the archives and actually read that. Since then, I would have to go through the archives because I could not find any of the archives that I could actually click on to pop up any of these deaths. And a lot of these deaths are a lot of unreported or unidentified body that they just let go into surplus. What I do have is the last time I did some research, the farthest back I could go is 2015. In 2015, we had a man named Thomas Johnson. He was murdered by a man named Dave Stevens with a machete on the White Rock Trail. In the same year, in 2015, 18-year-old Zoe Hastings was murdered by Antonio Cochran, and her body was found in a creek near White Rock Lake. Here's the thing. There were definitely more deaths between 2015 and 2019. They are just not well documented. That's the problem with Dallas. There's far too many deaths throughout the year to be able to find all of this documentation. I probably can. I just have to dig and dig and dig and find all the archives. In June 2019, we get a transgender woman named Kyle Lindsay, and she was murdered by Ruben Alvarado at White Rock Lake at the park. March 2022, a male in his 50s, his body was found in the lake, as well as the body of a female that same month. Then in April of 2022, we found another male body in the lake. In May 2022, they find a body, but at the dog park that's next to White Rock Lake. Again, there's definitely more stuff that happened since then. I tried to go through the archive. There's a lot of shit that's missing, okay? So then we go to February of 2024. Again, I know for a fact there was stuff that happened in 2023. I just can't find it. February of 2024, there is a person found dead in a submerged vehicle at White Rock Lake. Now we get to June 2024. There was a woman who was actually mishmolted at White Rock on the trail. So after that, there were a lot of people that were being very careful about going to the lake and everything. And then In April of 2024, there was a man that drowned at White Rock Lake. Then we go into June 2024, where a woman, and I'm not sure if they ever caught this man, but she was attacked by a man at White Rock Lake. But those are all of the tragedies that I can currently find for White Rock Lake. White Rock, the main stories that we hear about is the Lady of the Lake. She has been well known. There is a celebrity ghost story about it. There is the Neiman Marcus story about it. There's a lot of different things about White Rock Lake. Like, that specific story has been heard on White Rock Lake. Per usual in Texas, in my opinion, I do have a video about the Goatman in Denton, the Goatman's Bridge, and apparently there's also a Goatman ghost story here in White Rock as well. Nowadays, whenever there is a tragedy, there was a tragedy recently. A bicyclist got run over. I believe this was in 2023, and they were thrown into the lake. And the thing is, since people can't even go into the lake, you don't really discover stuff unless it comes onto land or unless the police themselves are already dredging the lake to look for something. This is all of the history that I could find, all of the tragedies, all of the haunted stories that we've been telling. The main thing now is just don't go to White Rock Lake after dark. Like, if you are, you're driving, not just because of the ghost stories, but mainly because it's become a very dangerous place. There's been too many stories about people being attacked nowadays. Hell, just this year we've had many. Those were just the ones that I could find. A lot of this stuff I had to piece together. I went to the White Rock Museum, and I actually have a few videos from the White Rock Museum, and that section of the bathhouse at the Cultural Center, that part of the museum no longer exists. So I'm gonna try to upload that as its own separate video that is connected and linked to this afterwards. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you stayed till the end, please comment down below what scary story you know, or what scary story isn't well known about your hometown. Please join me in the next video. I'm going to be trying to upload as much as possible. A lot of things happened. I lost my job. I'm looking for a new job. There were too many things happening in the month of October and November. So please subscribe, and I will post as much as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, y'all. There was a squirrel by the door. Hi, buddy.